Often on this channel I talk about how content production and the creator economy as a whole is the biggest leap forward we've had for democracy in decades. However, at this moment in time, we're having to fight a united front of corporate and wealthy interests just to ensure that our access to information remains fair and true, and enables us to make the best decisions we can within our representative democracies to improve society to the utopia that we hope one day it could be. The Fourth Estate, which describes news journalism, is one of the most important institutions that we have in society. It is the journalist's role to represent the interests of us the people in relation to the business and political elites who claim to be doing things in our name. So, to provide us the people with a certain reliable set of information that we can act on in our day-to-day life, journalists have to abide by a certain code of ethics. Stanford lists a number of moral codes, but there are two that I would like to bring up in particular to set the foundations for this. The first is to seek truth and report it. So this includes fact-checking information, making sure there is as few biases as possible, and ensuring that the information isn't intentionally distorted to wield a certain outcome. And the second is to act independently, which obviously includes avoiding corruption and potential conflicts of interest. It is this second point which I think foundationally is the problem with traditional media at the moment, and why we have all lost trust in these organizations that should be representing the truth as fairly as possible, where we should be able to go and receive factual information that we don't even have to question, which obviously is not what we see today. So if journalists fail to abide by these code of ethics, we start losing trust in their organizations and the Fourth Estate as a whole, and that allows misinformation to become more prevalent and effective because we have no base source, a library where we know, okay, this stuff is right. All of a sudden, if that is fractured, it allows misinformation to slip right through and pose as that same library that we once had. So why does it seem like these news organizations actively attempt to undermine their role as the mediator of truth between the people in power and us, the rest of society? Just as a preface, this overall is sort of about the US context, but that can closely apply to the Australian and British context due to the similarity of our systems and the foundational problem as a whole, which I'll get into very soon. But, non-English speaking countries can run into completely different issues which are just as relevant and deserve, a whole other PhD worth of writings on their own. A prime contemporary example of just journalists throwing out the moral code, you can't even call them journalists at this point, but was the Dominion voting machines lawsuit against Fox News, where Fox News had to pay out something like $1.2 billion in defamatory damages to Dominion, and now another voting machines company, Smartmatic, is going off the back of that to also sue Fox News for their false statements against stolen election, which obviously it wasn't, thanks Murdoch. The lawsuit accuses that Fox News and its parent company Fox Corp immensely damaged Dominion's brand through airing falsehoods about the 2020 election, specifically conspiracy theories suggesting its voter machines were somehow rigged against the former President Trump. Fox attorneys have insisted the network was operating within its First Amendment rights to investigate the claims, painting the lawsuit as a dangerous attack on the free press. Yeah, free press, buddy, sure. And the First Amendment isn't universal. I mean, you can just ask Assange and Snowden. They know pretty well firsthand that you got First Amendment rights until the US government doesn't like you. But additionally, in a more civilian context, when the rights and liberties of others are in serious jeopardy, speakers who provoke others into violence, wrongfully and recklessly injure reputations, or incite others to engage in illegal activities may be silenced or punished. Basically, if your words cause direct harm to someone else, then, freedom of speech starts to be limited just a bit, which, fair enough. And especially people in positions of power, particularly journalists, news media, or any politicians or business execs, they have an increased responsibility to ensure that what they say is accurate and fair because their words carry a lot more weight than me tweeting out to my 57 followers. And this continuation of just perpetuating misleading and information just continued into the trial like it was a comedy scene what was going on. Like here, the judge noted that to the Fox lawyers that I need to feel comfortable that when you represent something to me, it's the truth. I'm not very happy right now. I don't know why this is such a difficult thing. Well, that's a big thing for a judge to say. It was because the Fox lawyers conveniently forgot to mention the fact that, Murdoch was still officially the head of the company, which is a big point there, because it includes him in the liability of those potential damages. So not only are they lying in the public eye, they're also completely lying and abandoning any sort of ethics and moral grounding in the courtroom as well. Courtrooms are meant to be sort of the pinnacle of this mediator of truth, where both sides give their perspective, both sides lay out the facts, and then the judge or jury is able to come to some sort of consensus about what happened in that case and potentially who is liable for any damages. But that's not possible when you have these people who just don't know anything else but to lie. So despite all this mess, beyond the Dominion lawsuit, you might be surprised to hear that no one has been able to hold these people accountable. And because they're in such a position of power that we can't as individuals, on our own with little pickets. And politicians are too scared to stand up to them because as soon as they do, they get character assassinated and all of a sudden they lose their positions of power. So it's just a cycle of them putting their buddies in because they can, because they control the information that we have access to. And even when you do finally have defamation cases, pre this Dominion trial brought about these hosts and presenters just completely and utterly lying on air, it doesn't even get through the first steps of court because the judge throws it out because he's like, no one could possibly assume that the biggest primetime host in the country could possibly be telling the truth. No, absolutely no way. And the case is just thrown out. So all of a sudden you had this opportunity to hold these people accountable for their words and it just doesn't matter. They can say whatever they want. Cause violence, destroy democracy, literally cause the deaths of tens of thousands of people in your country. No problem. Do what you want. When people live in a sphere dominated by Murdoch or Fox talking points, all of a sudden those executives have the power to sway conversation very directly because all they have to do is express doubt in either the right or wrong places, and it can cause a spiral effect. So there are legitimate concerns about the reliability of voting machines for a number of reasons that I won't get into. But when they express these legitimate concerns onto these companies with another taint of, they've got misguided interests, they want Sleepy Joe to win, then all of a sudden people start legitimizing it in their head. They're like, these concerns are legitimate, these are fair. Okay, well there is this sort of bias because I've been heard by all of these Fox pundits tell me that there's this liberal bias in society. So it must be true that they're swapping votes out, right? I keep seeing these things pop up. There are legitimate research studies that basically show that the more you see something, the more you believe it's true, even if it's just a completely nonsense word. So by the control that they have as a society, they can just put these little pockets of information, poke these pockets of doubt, and people legitimize it into their own minds, and the more it goes on, the harder it is to unwind. And from our individual standpoint, trying to find ways to fight back against this plague, it's extremely difficult because we can't even boycott the brand because they own everything. And even if they don't own everything, we as individual citizens don't have the time and mental space to figure out which of the countless conglomerates do they actually own, hence what to avoid. And sometimes you don't even choice. If I want to watch The Last of Us, if I want to watch F1, I have to put money into Murdoch's pocket. If I want to watch the new Disney show, I have to put money into Murdoch's pocket. I don't have a choice here, effectively. So this is a move that has to come from a different direction. We can help push that move, but individually, we don't have the pen to paper power here. We have to push our politicians to make this change. Because it doesn't matter how much campaign funding politicians receive from a particular lobbyist. If there's one issue that is the major talking point in society, and the campaign comes down to that one issue, let's say media diversity and ownership, let's say the climate crisis, then all of a sudden people are going to be voting on that one swinging issue, and if you're the politician who didn't receive money from those campaigns and from those lobbyists, well, you're the one who's going to get in. So these sort of issues, they need to be that one talking point where people make their decision based on that issue, so it can't keep perpetuating in the way that it has. Private media organizations generally have one goal, right? And that is to satisfy shareholder interests. Bring in higher ratings, which allows more advertising dollars to go through and hence higher profits and higher dividends, etc., share price, whatever. Often the problem with a lot of defamation cases, not a lawyer, but I have to observe the space and understand it loosely, is that you need to be able to prove that it was a deliberate lie. A false statement isn't necessarily defamation, it has to be intentionally false. And the reason Dominion won so clearly in a settlement even before the trial went ahead was because they were able to prove that Fox deliberately lied through the text messages that the hosts and executives sent between each other. And this plays exactly into those corporate interests, because literally in those text messages, they said, okay, we need to start changing what we're talking about because all our viewers are switching to our alt-right competitor, Newsmax. And we don't want that. We don't want them to go away, so we'll just keep lying, keep feeding them what they want, this false narrative to keep them along no matter the cost. Like, literally here, one of the quotes from a Fox executive. It's remarkable how weak ratings make good journalists do bad things. You know, these defamation cases have shown that these political pundits and that these news reporters are just faces for these corporate and political interests, you know, regardless of these journalistic and moral ethics that they should be abiding by. They're no longer representing us, they're representing the people with the money and the people with the power. You know, even publicly funded organizations like the ABC and BBC aren't insusceptible to these issues because guess who funds them? The government, and the government has their own interests. Government can't specifically dictate what is broadcast on these shows, but they can definitely increase and decrease the funding depending what is said and what narratives are pushed. And you know, in the case of BBC, reporters can be stood down for legitimate and fair concerns over political bias when really it's just the truth that the party in power doesn't like. Or like a half sneeze and then to a normal sneeze, righto. The problem with losing trust in traditional media is that it opens the door for conspiracy theories to flourish. Now, we're not talking about like the social media algorithms pushing things, because we've heard that a million times. But the way traditional media broadcasts the news can legitimize these crazy headlines and crazy stories that then get thrown out into the ether because they've been backed by these legitimate organizations. You know, if every single news media organization said that, you know, the vaccine is 100% safe, you've got nothing to worry about, it's fully tested, then no conspiracy theory talking about, oh, it's untested, it's dangerous, you shouldn't try it, would ever flourish because it's got no grounding to stand on. But as soon as some of those organizations start saying, well, you know, there's these issues, there's those issues, there's this happening, all of a sudden they can run off the back of that and see, look, they're saying there's issues, see, here's the issues that they're not actually talking about because they're too scared. And you're like, well, fair enough, because they've just slid down that same slide. But that slide doesn't even start in the first place. Well, to make that jump all of a sudden becomes a lot harder and you grasp a lot less people. And, you know, I'm not saying that all these organizations should broadcast the exact same thing, because that's not society. We are 8 billion people with 8 billion different upbringings and 8 billion different perspectives on the world. But I am saying that they should have to abide by these sort of code of ethics to ensure that at least what they do broadcast is to the best of their abilities, the fairest possible representation of a truth. Because, you know, what is truth? That's a whole nother thing in itself. So what should a true mediator look like? Well, firstly, they should be completely financially independent. The people who write the articles, the people who choose the people that write the articles, should be completely separated from the advertising team and the team that brings in the finances. Additionally, they should have to legally abide by these code of ethics. There should be some sort of watchdog, some sort of, you know, a government overlook that doesn't necessarily tell them what to write and is completely separate from the politicians, but rather ensures and keeps these companies accountable that they are abiding some basic level of ethics. Additionally, journalists shouldn't have to abide by the toxic headline culture that we've bred in today's internet society. Like, sure, there are captivating headlines in every piece of media that we've ever produced because you need to buy my newspaper, not theirs. But the point we've gotten today has gotten so ridiculous that all of a sudden people are just writing the article for the headline, not because the article actually means anything when an article interchange it to video or any source of media. Additionally, because of this change in how finances are flowed into the organizations, it has given them less money to produce quality journalism. Because all of a sudden getting one click is a lot less worthwhile than getting one newspaper purchase. But people aren't purchasing newspaper anymore, so clicks is the only way they think that they can get money. So this means they've less money to put into quality journalism that may take a bit longer, rather into cliche buzzline-esque Daily Mail headlines, where there is no journalism there. It's just like, let's get people to click for the sake of it, because that's the only way we can satisfy our corporate interests. So if all the major news organizations combined into one bundle, right? I'm not talking about the Apple News bundle, but like you could like pick a bundle of the top 10 providers. I would 100% get access to that. Because all of a sudden you can get this variety of news providers and they're not having to abide by the extreme headline culture because you're already there. They already know you're interested in the stuff that they're putting out. They get a stable stream of income that allows them to put money back into quality journalism. And it means that all of a sudden you have created a system where people value this kind of information, and it's not something where they're just trying to beg for clicks, but rather, we value the work that you do. Can you please keep doing it? And hopefully satisfy, once again, our interests rather than purely profit-driven corporate political elites that are acting in their own interest at the cost of us. And one of the final and most important things, like the biggest petition in Australian history, the petition in Australian history with the most signatures has been completely ignored. The Murdoch Royal Commission petition, headlined by Kevin Rudd, became the biggest petition in Australian history, yet because we don't have the laws that say so, they can completely leave it on the cutting room floor. They don't have to bring it up in the political chambers. It doesn't have to be debated on. It can be completely ignored. But if this Royal Commission were to take place, we would get access to a clear guidelines of what are the problems, what needs to be changed. And then it's a lot harder to ignore for these politicians. All of a sudden it is deliberately clear by your own government that these are issues that currently exist and here's how to stop them. Because without this, right, they have no incentive to change. There is no reason for the organizations to change because they are making money and they're in a system where they either have to do this or they die off. So, we have to place pressure on our political representatives to either enact these petitions and royal commissions or just to force change within the system that currently promotes and glorifies the idea that one person can control the entire rhetoric across every single English-speaking Western country. Just ridiculous. So make sure that is the talking point at your politicians' next election, because that's the only way things like this are going to change. Your vote is the most powerful thing that you have, because these people are desperate for power. So make sure they're desperate for the power that you give them to create society the best place that it possibly can be.